feel like a teacher. All right, thank you so much. All right, clerk. I am in receipt of a letter from Speaker Welch replacing permanent member Representative Hirschauer with temporary member Representative Costa Howard. The chair would like to recognize Costa Howard on House Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 2827. Representative, I think that we will go ahead and adopt your amendment, and then you can present it as part of the bill. Representative Yang Rohr moves that House Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 2827 do adopt. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Representative, we are going to go ahead and take a quick look at your witness slips. If I can find it. All right, we have 62 indicated as no position. We have 38,909 opponents. We have 310 proponents. With permission, we will waive the reading of those witness slips. Okay. I appreciate that. We are going to go ahead and, in the interest of time, not read all of the witness slips, but I will read a sampling of the organizations that have taken a formal position.
Point of order,
under the
Chair, could you also please update your number of witness slips, because I know it's not much greater than that. As of 7:30 this morning when I last looked, it was much higher.
We can check that. We can come back to that. Those are the numbers that I have in front of me now. We will look for an update if that's possible. Under the proponents, we do have the Illinois chapter of the American Academy of Pediatricians, the Illinois State Board of Education, the Illinois Education Association, the Illinois Psychological Association, Equality Illinois, the Illinois Collaboration on Youth, and the Illinois Directors and Owners of Child Care Centers. Under the opposition, we do have the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, Illinois Christian Home Educators, Illinois Freedom Alliance, Illinois Policy, and Agudath Israel of Illinois. With a record of no position, we do have DCFS. Representative, if you'd like to introduce your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Minority Spokesperson. Let's begin. House Bill 2827 begins to address the issues around education in our homeschools community and for children across the state. Education is a fundamental right for every child. However, we know that loopholes exist, and we have a duty to ensure that children actually receive an education and that they don't fall through the cracks of our system. Currently, Illinois has zero, I'm going to say it again, zero regulations. 38 states have regulations. Illinois is an outlier. This is not something we want to be an outlier on. 38 states. The Homeschool Act is a minimal step to provide accountability, transparency, and protections for families who choose homeschooling as an option. So let's actually talk about what the bill does. The bill is about a form. ISB will create this form, and it requires families to declare that they're choosing homeschooling as their option. It is that simple. In fact, these forms actually already exist on multiple regional office of education websites. These forms already exist. This process has previously been in place as an option for families. So this declaration form includes your name, date of birth, grade level, home address, again, information that is currently on forms, and our homeschool administrators will also be submitting their name, date of birth, contact information, home address, They're going to ensure that they have at a minimum of high school education, whether it's a diploma, a GED, or something that's equivalent, that was in the amendment. And these can be submitted online or in person to our local school districts. And again, these forms already exist on many of our ROE websites. The bill also includes information for DCFS in the event that there's a hotline call that they would notify the ROEs and check to see if an individual declared that they were homeschooling, and they would be able to confirm whether or not that is actually something that somebody filled out, so that we can indicate that they're not truant, that they are receiving some form of education. The bill requires an educational portfolio, and in my many conversations with current homeschool administrators who are very supportive of the bill, they indicated they already do these things. They have information that indicates that they have materials that document a child's educational progress. They keep these curricular materials, whether they're workbooks or worksheets, and because they as well want to make sure that they are keeping up with the progress of a student. Let's remember that the law already requires homeschoolers to cover subjects in the Illinois School Code. They have to have language arts, math, biological science, physical science, social science, fine arts, physical development, and health. That is already law. It is also currently law under 105 ILCS 526-1 that students in Illinois must comply with the compulsory attendance requirements. That currently is the law. Now, because we have no idea how many homeschool students that are out there, we also included a data provision that would, which is in the amendment, clarifications that are in the amendment, that we are going to be, and I want to make sure I read this correctly, that what they're going to be doing is that the ROEs will be breaking down information, this data, by region and school district, by grade level, gender identity, again, within receiving homeschooling within their boundaries. There is a, and beginning February 1st, 2028, ISB will be reporting this to the General Assembly, and again, there's a sunset provision. With the amendment, again, the Act complies with all federal, state, and local privacy laws. The other thing the bill does is it requires our registration and recognition for all non-public elementary and secondary education, or secondary schools, excuse me. There's a lot of information in this bill, and anyone who's actually read it also understands that this is a bill about making sure we keep kids safe, that families continue to have the ability to homeschool if that's what they so choose to do. There's nothing in this bill that requires vaccinations. There's nothing in this bill that requires vaccinations. And there's nothing in this bill that actually prohibits an individual from homeschooling. We are talking about a form. I'm here to take any questions, but I have additional witnesses.
Thank you, Representative. I do have a letter from Speaker Welch replacing permanent member Representative Stewart with temporary member Representative Croak. Clerk, if you could please update our record. Representative Ellick, in deference to your request, we did look back at the underlying bill witness slips. I apologize for not doing that earlier. We do have 943 individuals listed as proponents, 41,370 listed as opponents, and 148 indicated as no position. I imagine there's a fair amount of duplication between the underlying bill and the amendment. If the proponents would like to approach the table, we will have 4 people speaking in favor of the bill and 4 people speaking in opposition to the bill, and then we will open up to questions of our committee. It is a reminder, we are a bit time sensitive today. We're going to try and keep everything a bit tight. Representative, I do believe that there will be an amendment following, so we will need to bring the bill back to committee. Is that correct?
That's correct. correct, Chair. Just again, so that I state it for the record, so the record is clear, we have amendments that is coming, that I will be holding this bill on second. The amendment will come back to committee as we continue to address any concerns that anyone has and a few cleanup issues that have been brought to our attention.
Thank you. So if the proponents would like to take seats at the table, we may need to move around a little bit. Just state your name clearly for the record and go ahead and proceed, please.
There we go. Good morning. My name is Tanner Lovett. Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the committee, thank you for taking the time to listen to this testimony today. I was homeschooled from first grade until I graduated high school a year early. After 2 years at a community college, I attended Patrick Henry College, which some of you may know shares the campus and founder with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. While I went to PHC, I worked for HSLDA in the communications department. Today, I'm a father, husband, and veteran in the same community that I grew up in. I have a wonderful relationship with my siblings and my parents. It's safe to say that I am a homeschooling advocate my entire life. I'm a walking example, I feel like, of how successful someone can be as a homeschooled person. I believe that every child deserves the type of education that I received, whether they get it at home, in a private school, or in a public school. Every child deserves a quality education in a safe and nurturing environment. I believe in empowering parents who love and care for their children to make the best decisions for each individual child, and then being there as a society to help and support them with that. I also believe that as a people, we should do all we can to protect and help children who are in unsafe, abusive, or neglectful environments. And that's why I love this bill. It's exactly what Illinois needs. I've seen other states and other bills that were far too restrictive and put way too much stress on families who decided to homeschool, like limits on the type of curriculum to get pre-approved, for the number of school days per year, and providing evidence for that, and hours of a day that a student has to be instructed. All of that stymies some of the greatest advantages that homeschooling has, because they were written, honestly, by people who didn't understand homeschooling. And that's not the case with this bill. This bill was written in part by people who were homeschooled and get the need to balance children's rights and a parent's freedom to choose how they educate their kids. It provides a safe baseline to protect kids from the small minority of parents who use homeschooling as a way to hide abuse or neglect their children, and leaves the vast majority of homeschooling families alone. A family providing their children the kind of education that I received only has one additional requirement: register once a year with the school district with that form. It's the same thing I do with my 2 kids that attend public school. The only people who will be negatively impacted or have new requirements are the ones who should probably not be homeschooling in the first place. And I know that anyone who has homeschooled knows someone in their homeschool community who should not be homeschooling. So as someone who received a great educational experience at home, I believe this bill will help protect abused and neglected children and leave in place the freedom of parents to decide how to best meet the educational needs of their children. Thank you for supporting this bill.
Hi everyone, my name is Ayla McDonald. I just want to give a precursor before I start. There is a lot more to say on this issue than I have written down. I am aware of that, so please don't assume that I'm uninformed. I'm here to ask you to please support HB 2827. While the regulations proposed in this bill are minimal, House Bill 2827 is an important step in the direction of promoting safer environments for homeschooled youth, supporting their educational progress, and hopefully contributing to lower levels of child abuse and educational neglect that many Illinois homeschoolers face, and that is completely unmeasurable with Illinois' current lack of homeschool regulations. I was homeschooled by parents who prioritized hiding abuse over safety for their children, who did not allow my siblings and I the option of attending school or of undergoing testing that we wanted, and who tried to prevent me from graduating after 13 years of homeschooling, fighting against my attempts to apply to college for FAFSA, and against providing me with transcript documentation. My experiences are not unique among my homeschooled peers. Within my Springfield homeschool community, many friends were stuck in similar family cycles of domestic violence, substance use, inconsistent educating, and subject to neglect. We didn't have knowledge of or access to social service resources, and in many cases were misinformed by our parents as to the consequences of seeking outside help. The adults in our community did not assume the responsibility of protecting us when they made the choice to collectively raise us outside of formal social structures, but instead participated in a culture of promoting staying in abusive marriages, of raising children to be responsible for saving their abusers' souls, and of communal shunning of homeschool moms and of now grown homeschool kids who took it upon themselves to divorce abusive spouses and to pursue legal action against community sexual assault perpetrators. While many homeschool and unschool parents in Illinois may be educating responsibly, just as many are failing to do so. It's self-serving and a privileged choice for parents to oppose protective measures that would benefit children in their communities who are being abused, neglected, and isolated, and who, due to parents' lack of organizing on their behalf within their communities, are left without recourse, are left lacking context about what is safe and unsafe behavior, and through neglect about information, resources, and opportunities that they have a right to access. I now hold a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I've conducted an independent IRB-approved study interviewing homeschool and unschool parents in states with different levels of homeschool regulation to answer the question, under what conditions can home education regulation meet the needs of homeschool families? While this study is yet to be published, I will convey that parents in states with the level of homeschool regulation proposed in House Bill 2827 do not find it difficult to comply, but to the opposite effect, find it easy to meet annual notice of intent and educational reporting requirements. However opposed Illinois homeschool parents may be to this bill, it will serve to benefit all homeschooled kids, especially those who are most under the radar, for whom ensuring access to safe and healthy homeschools, quality education, and growth supportive opportunities should already be the priority of homeschool parents. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your personal stories. That was really meaningful to us. I believe that we do also have a person on the virtual program to provide testimony. If they could come off mute, state your name and organization, and provide your testimony.
Yes, good morning, Chairwoman Mussman and members of the committee. My name is Jonah Stewart, and I am the Executive Director of the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, a national child advocacy nonprofit founded and run by people who are homeschooled. We are the only organization in the country that exists to advocate for the safety and the well-being of homeschooled children. We know from our own lives that not every homeschool experience is a good one. Homeschool alumni regularly reach out to us with their stories. Some tell us about parents who start out with good intentions, but have no follow-through. Some tell us about how their schooling stopped entirely for years while their parents were sick or their siblings were young. Still others tell us that they were forced to teach themselves entirely with no adult help because their parents simply were not equipped to homeschool. On top of that, we know from research that some abusive parents who have no intention whatsoever to actually homeschool exploit lax homeschooling laws to hide their children from mandatory reporters at school. We have tracked over 500 cases of extreme abuse and neglect in homeschool settings, where the abuse escalated because of the isolation afforded through homeschooling. Several of those cases were in Illinois, including 7 fatalities. HB 2827 addresses these glaring concerns. It protects against educational neglect by requiring parents to maintain a portfolio of their child's schoolwork, to hold at least a high school diploma, and to give instruction in basic subjects, including language arts and math. And it addresses abusers using homeschooling to disappear their children by prohibiting those convicted of certain crimes from homeschooling and by requiring an annual notice of intent to homeschool so that homeschooled children do not fall off the radar. These are common sense, responsible measures that respond to real-world acute harm experienced by homeschooled children. And just to zoom out, Illinois does less to protect its homeschooled children than the vast majority of states. It's one of only 12 states that does nothing as far as requiring a notice of intent. In terms of homeschool oversight, HB 2827 still leaves Illinois homeschooling less regulated than it is in Louisiana, West Virginia, and Florida, all of which are considered extraordinarily friendly to homeschooling. Those who call this bill an existential threat to homeschooling are just plain wrong. When bills on homeschooling come up, a lot of airtime is spent on a parent's right to direct their children's education. Much less time is devoted to a child's right to safety and an education that will prepare them for an open future. CRHE enthusiastically supports HB 2827 because it prioritizes the education and the safety of homeschooled children. I urge you to please vote yes.
Thank you so much. If you could stay available, perhaps if there are questions. I believe the State Board of Education is available and would like to make a statement and then also be available for questions. Thanks. I know the speaker's table is a little tight.
Hi, good morning. Dana Stoger with the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education is supportive of the concepts contained in this bill to ensure that all students receive an education per our compulsory education laws in the state of Illinois. We don't think that these measures are things that people will not be able to comply with easily, and we do not expect them to be things that people will find overly difficult or overly burdensome. So happy to answer any questions throughout the debate.
Thank you. Now, if we would like to have the opponents approach the table and make your statements in whatever order you choose. Just be sure to state your name for the record as you're proceeding with your testimony. Thank you. Welcome. Might have to take turns.
Good morning, Chair and Ranking Member. My name is Will Estrada. I'm Senior Counsel at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I'm a proud homeschool graduate, proud homeschool dad, and proud Puerto Rican. I oppose HB 2827 as originally introduced and the amendment because it's premised on two mistaken assumptions and will do two harmful things. Mistaken assumption number one. You've heard from the proponents their claim that children who are being homeschooled are at greater risk of abuse and neglect. This is not supported by the two peer-reviewed studies that have been produced. I have copies of those. I could talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, I won't. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Mistaken assumption number two. Homeschooling is unregulated in the state of Illinois. Now, we heard some of the proponents say that there are no regulations, and then we heard that there are things that homeschoolers have to do. In the 1950 landmark case of People versus Levison, the court made it very clear that homeschool parents had to educate their children, had to teach them the required subjects, had to do better or the same as the public schools, and if they didn't, the burden was on the homeschool family to show this to the authorities. Again, I could talk about this for hours, be happy to answer any questions that you have about it. As well, it's important to note that DCFS is there to investigate cases of abuse and neglect. This should not be put a burden on the public schools. DCFS is underfunded, overworked, and instead of putting more burden on them, we should provide greater funding and support for our hardworking caseworkers. And then Illinois has robust educational neglect laws. Those are the two mistaken assumptions, and here are the two harmful things that HB 2827 would do. The first one is it would allow the regional offices of education in Chicago public schools to come in at any time and do reviews of the family's educational portfolio. Section 40 has been billed as just applying to when a family comes up before DCFS, but there's actually several different parts of it. I want to read the last sentence of Section 40. The Regional Office of Education, Intermediate Service Center, or School District has the power to conduct an investigation to see if a homeschool declaration form under Section 20 has been submitted for their child and any other investigations, plural, as needed. Section 25C gives these same authorities the power to request the educational portfolio at any time. This will be a burden particularly on vulnerable communities, those who lack privilege to hire attorneys, families and other people who are most at risk of coming into contact with our criminal justice system. Which leads me to the final harm that HB 2827 will do. Criminalization of the failure to file a piece of paperwork. We heard a lot about where Illinois stands with other states. Not one single state in the nation, even highly regulated states like New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, make it automatic criminal Class C misdemeanor, 30 days in prison if convicted, $500 fine, criminal conviction, potential removal of children and placed in temporary foster care if you fail to file paperwork. Pennsylvania, for example, which has high regulation, says that it goes through a 30-day review process, independent, impartial review, and then the highest penalty is you can't homeschool for 12 months. This will make our most vulnerable communities at risk to prison, a criminal conviction, when we're going in a direction of trying to reduce the people in the criminal justice system. I could go on, but we've got some great witnesses. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
My apologies. Hi. All right, good morning, Chair and distinguished committee members. Thank you so much for this opportunity to address you this morning. My name is Aziza Butler. I am a homeschooler. I am also a former Chicago Public Schools teacher. I am the next generation leader at Ambassador Church, and I'm a resident of the South Side of Chicago. And I'm also the founder of We School, which is a flexible schedule learning community for homeschooling families. But most importantly, I'm a mother who loves my children. I came today because I want to express my strong opposition to House Bill 2827. What really breaks my heart about this bill is that it's based on the underlying assumption that education cannot work without legislators and district bureaucrats and school administrators. But the reality is that education cannot work without parents. This is not just a homeschool issue. This is an issue with our broader education system. Too often, we do not trust parents to take the lead in their children's education, especially when those parents are Black and brown, and especially when those parents are poor. This bill targets homeschool parents and treats us as criminals, guilty until proven innocent. This issue is deeply personal to me. My foremothers were forcibly separated from their children as a result of their own enslavement. So the opportunity to hold my children close, to nurture and love them, and to do everything in my power to give them the best education possible honors the legacy of Black mothers who came before me. It pains me to think that the state of Illinois would get in the way of that. The proponents of this legislation say that these new regulations will somehow protect children from abuse and neglect, but unfortunately, this approach is completely misguided. Research supports the idea that homeschooling environments may reduce the risk of abuse. Dr. Brian Ray's research indicates that children who are homeschooled are 40% less likely to die from abuse or neglect compared to the national average. This could be attributed to the closer family bonds and the higher level of parental supervision that homeschooling entails. At the same time, research from Psychology Today highlights the persistent issue of educator sexual misconduct in public schools, stating that 1 out of 10 public schools students experience sexual abuse. There is no credible study that suggests that homeschool children are at any higher risk of abuse than their publicly schooled peers. Let me be clear, this bill will not decrease cases of abuse. None of the regulations proposed in the bill would do anything to reduce instances of abuse. Collecting forms, collecting data, requiring added oversight of curriculum. While all of these will place unnecessary burdens on well-meaning homeschool families, none of the added processes will do anything to curb abuse. We must not ignore the reality that there are already child protection laws in place requiring the reporting of abuse cases, laws that apply just as equally within the home or the school. While we cannot clearly see how the bill will accomplish its stated goal of preventing abuse, it would certainly have many unintended negative consequences for homeschooling families and for local school districts and communities. Black families like my own are choosing to homeschool in larger and larger numbers each year. The public schools are failing our children, and homeschool represents a much better alternative. In 2024, only 31% of Illinois public high school students met or exceeded proficiency in English language arts, and only 26% in math. Homeschoolers, in contrast, consistently outperform public school students on standardized tests. Black homeschool children, in particular, score as much as 42 percentile points above their public school counterparts. This bill will intimidate and discourage parents from choosing this much better option for their children. This bill will impose additional burdens on already stretched local schools, police departments, and courts. This bill would require school districts to manage increased administrative tasks related to homeschooling, including data collection, reporting, and potentially enforcing truancy. There are no provisions for additional funding to support these new administrative tasks. Increased truancy enforcement could lead to costly hearings and legal procedures for noncompliance. Again, the bill does not provide for any additional funding to support the added resources needed to enact this regulation. The lack of funding will make robust enforcement on these new regulations virtually impossible, which means that enforcement will be selective. In a system that already surveils, targets, and criminalizes Black and brown people and the poor, I do fear that the brunt of this potential harassment will be borne by homeschooling families who look and live like my own. Study after study has shown that the most important factor in the child's educational outcome is how their parents and family engage in the process. Many of the problems facing our public schools stem from the inability to partner with families, especially under-resourced and underrepresented families, and involve them meaningfully in the education process. As a mother and an educator and community leader, I would rather see this committee spend its valuable time contemplating how to help parents believe in themselves more and be more involved in their children's education than bills like HB 2827 that target and harass the parents who already do. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Bob Gilligan. I'm the Executive Director of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, and thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. Today, I'm here not only to share the position of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, the Catholic school perspective, but other non-public schools as well in our opposition to House Bill 2827. As you've just heard, House Bill 2827 seeks to impose registration mandates on parents who choose to homeschool their children in an effort to ensure that these homeschool students are safe and receiving a sufficient education. However, it is unclear how this bill will advance either of those goals, and it is also unclear why non-public schools have been included in this legislation under the same pretenses. Why are the non-public schools opposed? First, the bill requires all non-public schools to send, upon request, a list of every student's name, date of birth, grade level, and home address, as well as the name and address of at least one parent or guardian of that child to ISB, the Regional Office of Education, and/or Chicago Public Schools. While the bill states upon request, we see no situation under which this bill will not be a standing annual request for all students enrolled in non-public schools. Further, if a non-public school does not provide their parent, students confidential information, which is considered an educational record under the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, it does so under the threat of losing their ISB registration or recognition status. Requiring non-public schools to provide their educational records to ISB, who can then release that information to the ROE or the local school district where the student resides, requires non-public schools to breach the trust of its parents, as it will be done without their consent. To do this without running afoul of FERPA, an exception must apply. While ISB says this requirement is compliant with FERPA, we disagree with that interpretation. This is critical to iron out because it will be the non-public school, not ISB, not the ROE, not CPS or the local school district, that will have to respond to a parent's complaint. And the non-public school will be subject to a penalty if there's a violation, not any of those public entities. Secondly, the bill requires all non-public schools to register with ISB. Presently, this process is voluntary, and it should remain so. The only reason for this change is to require all non-public schools to provide this confidential information to the state at risk of denying their registration. House Bill 2827 places non-public schools between the parent and the government, with no clear understanding as to how this law improves education for non-public students or it makes them safer. Finally, we have a concern about the storage of information. Requiring this information to be stored by governmental units on one or more servers only increases the risk of a data breach, which can be a concern for all parents, public and non-public alike. If ISB has a data breach, like it did during the summer of 2024, all our parents' information is compromised. Similarly, CPS last month announced over 300,000 records of personal identifying information were compromised, going back to the 2017-2018 school year. While it is possible that any one of our schools could have a data breach, if that were to happen, it would probably only impact the students in that public school. Storing information, whether digital or physical, poses significant dangers in addition to data breaches, unauthorized users, loss, theft, and potential misuse. There's a lot of talk right now, especially at the federal government level, about who has access to confidential governmental information. There are legitimate concerns about a small number of people gaining access to sensitive data. With the number of undocumented children in our schools right now, it would be a tragedy for personally identifiable information to wind up with certain government agencies. Truancy and safety of children are challenges for all, those in the homeschool, non-public school, and public school settings alike, and this requires our attention. However, this bill is an intrusion into people's personal identity, making non-public schools and homeschoolers complicit in sharing that information with the government. There has to be a less intrusive way to address these challenges than what House Bill 2827 creates. Thank you for listening to our concerns.
Thank you, Chairperson Mussman, Vice Chair Favor-Diaz, and members of the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony this morning. I am Miley Smith, staff attorney and Senior Director of Labor Policy at Illinois Policy. I am before you today not only in my official capacity as an attorney, but also as the mother of 3 children in Illinois, whose experiences include having been in public school since 2020, in a private K-8 school from 2011 to 2024, and one who is currently homeschooled. I also spent nearly a decade as a private school board member. That experience in all 3 educational environments makes me uniquely qualified to share my legal and personal concerns, of which I have many. But I want to make clear from the outset, House Bill 2827 is a violation of parents' constitutional rights to direct the educational upbringing of their children, as recognized 100 years ago by the U.S. Supreme Court. Nothing in HB 2827 is about what's best for kids or somehow improves education for those students who are struggling. Instead, it's about tracking and regulating every single family and school that is not a government public school. That's why this bill has seen record-breaking opposition. As of 9:10 this morning, there were over 41,000 slips on the original bill. That is the highest of any bill since at least 2011. That's just as far back as our data team went. There's another 46,000 plus on the amendment. And many, if not most of those who are listed as supporting the bill appear to be opponents of the bill who filed incorrectly under the state's confusing slipping system. There are 2 main components of this bill: the regulation of homeschool families and the regulation of private schools. Both are constitutionally flawed. The regulation of homeschool requires an annual homeschool declaration form, yet it is more than just a form. The bill mandates the reporting of personal information, including a child's name and birth date, but there is no limit on what can be required in the declaration form. The Illinois State Board of Education is simply tasked with creating it. Homeschool families would have no say over what private information they must report to their local school district. Then there's the required educational portfolio that can be demanded by a regional office of education at any time and for any reason. The reasoning and requirements could be executed differently from region to region, creating uncertainty and therefore constitutional issues across the state regarding what is required. That educational portfolio must include a log of curricular materials used and samples of writing, worksheets, and other materials written by the child. Ironically, there is no requirement in state law that public schools report their own lists of curricula to the families of enrolled students. As I know from personal experience as a public school parent, parents of public school children get no list of curricula or other learning materials utilized in public school classrooms. What's more, the collection of families' lists of curricula amounts to a government log of what students are being educated using religious curriculum, akin to creating a list of families that subscribe to a particular religion or denomination. The regulation of private schools is also constitutionally problematic. The original version of HB 2827 requires all elementary and secondary private schools to report personal information on every enrolled child and their parents, including name, date of birth, grade level, and home address, to ISB and either a regional office or Chicago Public Schools. The amendment that's currently online doesn't change the problematic substance of this requirement. Instead of an annual report of personal information, the amendment requires the reporting anytime it is requested by ISB or a regional office. That could be more than once a year and for any reason. It is left to the whim of the state and, like the homeschool regulation, could be executed differently from region to region. If this bill were just about tracking the number of students engaged in private education, it could have required private schools to simply report the number of enrolled students by grade. But this goes much farther, requiring the transmission of personal information to the state. As such, HB 2827 is a prime example of government overreach. The state doesn't need to know exactly which school every child is attending, and there is no provision allowing parents to opt out of having their children tracked by state and local authorities. And as with the homeschool mandates, there are religious liberty implications with the private school regulation. Thousands of Illinois children attend parochial schools. This regulation is akin to the state creating a log of which religions those parents affiliate with, something the government cannot do. Notably, it's that type of government tracking that influences parents to choose private school or homeschool in the first place. In conclusion, the state should not be tracking private school and homeschool kids and their families. It should not be compiling lists of religious affiliations. There are significant constitutional violations involved, and so I urge this committee and members of the House to vote no.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to the question portion of today. We're probably going to need people to toggle in and out of those seats based on who maybe is best available to answer those questions. I will remind you, we do have a person online who is available for answering questions also. And who would like to begin? Minority spokesperson Ellig.
Good morning. Representative, I wanted to first start out maybe by acknowledging that witness slip count, which as we've been speaking is continuing to go up. And I wanted to mention the amendment one specifically, which was, I think, just posted probably 24 hours ago, and we've already exceeded the witness slip count on the original bill, and it's now, just a few minutes ago, 47,277 opposition slips to this bill. I also want to make sure that we acknowledge the witnesses for both the proponents and the opponents and our appreciation for you being here today. But I also want to acknowledge the thousands of people that came here today to take time out of their day to come and show their opposition to something that is very meaningful to them and their families. As I'm talking today, a couple just formalities here. I'm going to shorten homeschool administrator to parent as we talk about the bill, because I'm going to go into the bill in detail. I'm going to kind of take some liberties, but I understand the term. And instead of saying regional office of education or intermediate service center, or in the case of a school district organized under Article 34, I'm just going to say ROE. So we're just going to, is that okay?
That's okay, but there really is a very big difference between just being a parent and a homeschool administrator. I think ma'am, I apologize, I didn't catch her name. But when Aziza, when she testified, she is both of those things because she's part of a co-op. So there actually is quite a distinction. But for the purposes of your questions, Representative, I'll allow you to use those terms, and I think I know exactly what you say.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to state here that all of us here today care about the safety of children in schools. All sides, Republicans, Democrats, proponents, opponents, we all care about the safety of children in schools. We all want children to be free from abuse and neglect in any school setting that the families choose. We have passed bipartisan bills in this committee and other committees to do that. So I want to mention that as we go through, that I don't think that you have ill intentions towards children, and I hope that you don't think that we have ill intentions towards children and families. So with that said, I'm going to just start on some questions, and I wanted to start talking about the homeschool declaration form itself. So in the bill itself, and correct me if I have said something that is not in the statute, generally ISB creates the form. The homeschool parent submits the form to either the principal of the public school or to the school district office for the school that the child would attend. Does that sound right? Sounds like that's in the bill. The form will include the child's name, date of birth, their grade, their home address, and the parent's name, date of birth, contact information, and home address, and an assurance that the parent has their high school diploma. Does that sound correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that some parents might be nervous or embarrassed to provide this information to government entities?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
So we just heard an earlier bill related to, ICE detainers and government authorities coming into public schools. And we discussed that there's fear and intimidation by some people, and maybe they are leaving their kids at home instead of. So I would assume that there may also be homeschool parents that are concerned and nervous about giving their date of birth, for example, to Illinois government. Maybe they had a child young and they really don't want to share that information. Maybe there's various reasons they don't want to provide that information, but one of those important reasons could be, we don't know how you're going to use this information, so why do I have to give it up?
Representative, I wasn't tested in committee, so I cannot answer that question.
So, but do you agree that some people may be concerned about providing that information? You do not agree? It looks like you do not agree.
No, what I'm saying is I'm not going to, I don't have enough information. I'm not going to speculate as to what one family may feel or one family doesn't.
Okay, so why would you say that in the bill, the parent's date of birth is collected for homeschool parents, but it is not in the statute to collect that for private school parents? Why is there a difference?
I'll allow ISB to answer that question for you, Representative.
Dana Stoger with the State Board of Education. So the difference would be that one is a declaration form and one is a registration form. The registration form doesn't have individual names of parents. It has more aggregated totals. And so the declaration form would be for that individual family.
Say that again. There's the difference between a declaration form and a registration form. Can you repeat that?
So non-public schools do a registration, and this would be creating a declaration form for the homeschool families, and the declaration form would be for the individual family, and for the non-public schools, that is an aggregated number for the entire non-public school.
Well, that's not actually true, because that's not what the bill says. All right. Let's talk about some more about the form itself and maybe the process. This declaration form has to be submitted not just once, but annually by homeschool parents by August 1st to indicate the parent will be homeschooling. The principal or the district must transmit all forms to the ROE or CPS or whoever by September 1st. All forms shall be stored by the ROE for the children enrolled in a homeschool in that area for at least 5 years. And the school or the district or the ROE can receive the declaration form through electronic or web-based format, but must not require in that format. So it sounds to me like that form can be filled out on paper too, correct?
That's correct.
Who designs and hosts the website or the electronic transmission system where these forms are going through?
So that would be handled by the ROE or the ISC or CPS in those instances where those forms would be deposited.
What about the school?
The school could have that, but those forms would be for the ROEs.
But the forms have to go to the school or to the district first before they go to the ROE?
Yeah, and so the school district could establish that website, the ROE could establish that website, but they do not have to require electronic submission. So they could just get those forms in paper copy.
Well, actually, they all have to establish the website.
They could, right? So they could have that, but they don't have to require it be used on the website. So they have to have a portal for file submission, which they have a number of ways to submit files generally now, and that would be a part of that. But they do.
And you're talking about the district submitting to the ROE. Okay,
Districts
and I'm
and
talking about
ROE.
the school. Let's look within the school district system. The school has to accept these forms in some manner or another, either electronic or on paper. The school district office also has, and I'm talking every school in the district is how this is written. The school district office itself has to receive the forms on paper or electronically, correct?
Yeah.
And then the ROE has to receive the data from the district, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so is there funding available in this bill to help with the cost of all this electronic submission and the collection of the paper forms?
How districts do electronic submission between their individual schools in the district offices and to the ROEs is already part of their local resources. So they already have these types of file submission processes, and we don't anticipate that to be an additional cost.
How will parents know that it's secure?
All school districts have to comply with FERPA and ISRA, and they have to maintain those records in a confidential manner.
Okay, did that work for CPS when 700,000 former and current students' information was released recently?
You know, we don't want any sort of data breach whatsoever, and we hope that every school district takes the necessary measures to comply with FERPA and to protect their data as adequately as they can.
How does a parent know that there is a website and that they have to comply with this new notice requirement? Is ISB going to do an ad campaign to reach out to families throughout all across Illinois and say you have to submit this new form?
We'll have that form hosted on our website. We will also put that in our weekly message to be able to ensure that districts know that those exist. So the school districts that would need to be able to receive that form would have that information and be able to get that to their districts and the students that live within it.
Okay, so now school districts are responsible for the data transmission, the electronic storage, as well as outreach to homeschool families to ensure that they are filling out this form. Is that what I'm understanding?
They wouldn't have to necessarily do outreach. That would be incumbent on the homeschool families to file the form. And
How do they know they should file a form if they don't know that they're required to?
It sounds like 41,000 homeschool students already know that this form is coming and that there's a large number of students and advocacy organizations that would be able to help with that information gathering.
But it's really important because there may be tens of thousands of families that are not here today and that are not aware of this, but we don't have those numbers, so we really don't actually know that, correct?
Well, thank you, Representative. I'm so glad that you brought up that point that we don't really know, but based on the 41,000 people that you've indicated have filed a slip, I think the information will spread quite quickly.
Sure, but if it does not, that is eventually a truancy violation that family is involved in. So I think it's really important that ISB would have a role in informing families throughout Illinois. Unfortunately, that comes with a cost to ISB, and you just stated in the bill that we discussed earlier that ISB's been directed to not support bills that have a fiscal impact. This is going to have a fiscal impact on every level of the school system.
We've been instructed to oppose bills that have a fiscal impact on the State Board of Education, and we do not anticipate this bill to have a fiscal impact on us.
Okay, I believe you're wrong on that. I'm going to move on, though. When the paper forms are received by the school or the district office, who's responsible for typing that information into the computer system that's been created to track this? We assume is going to be created to track this. This will require both school personnel and school district personnel to have both a manual and an electronic process, correct?
Yes.
What if someone makes a mistake transcribing the paper copies into the electronic tracking system? How a parent won't even know that a mistake has been made. It could be a slipped birth date, misspelling of a name.
All the current laws that would be over top of any sort of information like that, any sort of irregularities or misentering would be at play still. There's nothing new about that. Those laws would still be in place.
So we have, okay, so here, just to review, we have two different information gathering systems, both paper and electronic, double the burden, creating confusion at the school, at each school. Let me be clear, this is at each school has to be ready to receive these forms, each district office and at the ROE. So schools are always stretched for resources. I think that's probably something we can agree on
Representative,
as well.
we do have a lot of people who want to ask questions in a limited amount of time. Can we move along a little faster,
I
please?
will do my best, but these are really, really important questions, Chair.
Please also recall the sponsor is going to bring the bill back, and you will have an opportunity to ask the questions offline.
Thank you. Let me just go to this then. Why are we having parents submit this form to various different levels of the school district? Why don't we just have them submit it to the ROE or the Intermediate Service Center or the Chicago Public Schools in one location? Why this confusion about all the different points of contact with the form?
I would argue there's certainly no confusion. And one of the points why we wanted to do it this way was because we think it's really important for families to have an opportunity to interact with their local neighborhood school. We hear about neighborhood schools all the time. We want families to be able to access any special education resources that they are able to access by law as property taxpayers. They have access to those services if needed. We want families to be connected to the point where if they have vision and hearing screenings going on, that a family would be able to avail themselves of those opportunities. From what we've heard from different groups of people, that many homeschool families are embedded in our communities with their neighborhoods and kids who attend all kinds of schools. So it gives kids an opportunity and families, again, to engage in the things that are happening locally. We thought that that was important. We want people to be engaged with their local schools. They don't have to go there. That is their choice to be able to do so. But we want them to know that they have things that they could be a part of and that they're included. And in fact, we think it's important to do that. We want people to be engaged at their level.
I think homeschool families are well aware that the public schools are available to them. But
That's so exciting. So that would make sure that they had opportunities to receive notices of those opportunities that they have. They can choose not to participate, but we want people to know what's there.
I would say, Representative, the opposite is true. Many families who would maybe be interested in taking part at services at the public schools are denied that opportunity because there's no resources available to do that. Children in all families are told, I'm sorry, you can't participate on this activity because we have so many kids that are enrolled already. We do not have room for you. So these touch points with the school are an administrative burden on every level of the school district that will be resources spent on families that are in other schools being homeschools than the actual public school students themselves. And I think that's an absolute shame. There's a part of the bill, page 5, line 22, that says that the schools shall inform the homeschool administrator of the principal of the school district to which the homeschool declaration form must be submitted. So now we find that if someone submits the form incorrectly, perhaps they thought that their local school was the correct one, but with school district lines, it's very confusing. Now the school or the district or both are responsible for making sure that they inform the homeschool administrator that the form must be submitted to a different place and inform them of that other place that it would be. This is more administrative burden. Okay, I think I've already made my point about the public school events and activities. Let me move on to the part that relates to the registration and recognition of non-public elementary and secondary schools. Why is it, we have voluntary registration now. Why is it important that this become mandatory?
The State Board of Education feels that we need to understand where all of our students are in the state of Illinois and to ensure that they are receiving an education.
I would also argue for the record that we have case law that actually identifies homeschools as private schools. And so legally, for parity purposes, it's important to make sure that the language is the same for both entities. We don't want to treat one group different than others. And ironically enough, and I believe Bob, during our conversations in this negotiation, actually non-private public schools they're already registered and recognized, so they already do this. You can shake your head at me, Representative, but I'm going to tell you that was the indication that we received from both our non-public school group as well as the Catholic school, as well as Aguda. Again, there may be there may be a handful that are not, but the overwhelming majority are already recognized and registered.
Well, if they're not registered and recognized, how do you know how many there are? Bob, would you be able to confirm, is that true, that most, non-public schools are registered and recognized? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, while we're moving, I'm sorry. Aziza, could you please click off your mic? Thank you so much.
Yeah, Representative Elk, most Catholic schools are registered or recognized. Not all of them are, but the vast majority are registered and recognized, but some are not. So how many are, I don't know off the top of my head, but most of them are.
So I have schools in my community that are not registered, and so let's say we have 102 Illinois counties. Let's say there's even just 2 in every county, which I think is probably highly unlikely because I can't account for how many might be in Chicago that are unregistered. So I think we are adding now, Dana, you mentioned you don't feel this is a burden on ISB. Yes, it is. Every year you're going to have X number more schools registering that I assume you all have to review. You don't just take that application and set it aside. I'm assuming there's a review process. So I disagree that this is not a burden on ISB.
That professional staff already exists at the State Board of Education to do that review process. It is not an additional levy on those staff.
Well, I'm glad they have plenty of extra time available to add that burden of workload on themselves. I have grave concerns with the fact that in the bill itself, it says that ISB may request the detailed student and parent information from all of these non-public schools. Now, a comment yesterday is, well, why would we don't want that information. We don't have that information on public schools right now. Then why is it in the bill?
All information like that is handled at the local public school level, and it would be similarly handled by the non-public schools as well. We don't house that directory style information at ISB for any of this, and we would not request that annually, nor would we want that information generally.
Representative, why is it in the bill then?
Repeat the question, please.
Why does it say in the bill that ISB may request that information, the detailed student data information from non-public schools? It is in the bill.
That is ISB's discretion.
Would you take that out of the bill?
It's for truancy purposes.
But ISB doesn't investigate truancy, correct?
We are the ROE for Chicago Public Schools. So
Okay, thank you. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the same data that's going to be held at Chicago Public Schools is going to be held at ISB, so now you need to collect the information from everybody else through the state to make parity, I guess?
No, we would not need that information. Chicago Public Schools has their own truancy office, and they would be able to handle that. We would just be able to move that information from one area to another, but they would already receive that information under this law.
So why can't we take it out of the bill? That ISB would have this information for all these non-public schools?
I would leave that up to the sponsor, but it's more about ensuring that we have that information available if there is a necessary need for it, if and when.
Exactly. That's unknown. That's vague. This is why people have concerns. This is exactly why people have concerns with this collection of information. One of the witnesses mentioned the aspect about religious freedom, and I will tell you I have these grave concerns too regarding the fact that non-public schools, many of whom have a religious affiliation, are now subject to the registration, but also the data collection of their individual student information. We hear speeches on the floor all the time about how the federal government and DOJ, they're doing all this stuff with all of our personal information. How can we possibly think that that's okay in Illinois? Especially when that information is tied to religious schools. For example, if you go to a Catholic school, your children go to a Catholic school, the government may assume that you at least support the policies of the Catholic Church and that you send their kids there, and if they decide they don't like that, they have all the information on all the parents who have ever gone, or other children who have ever gone to that school.
Is that a question, Representative?
I guess, yes. How do you reconcile the religious freedom aspect of the points in this bill?
Absolutely. There's nothing in this bill that limits or prohibits any form of religious freedom. There's nothing in this bill that prohibits a parent from curriculum that is religious. There's nothing in the bill that prohibits religious freedom.
I would also say there is nothing in this bill that actually protects children that are in abuse or neglect situations that are being kept at home and not in school. We did not give any resources, correct? We did not give any resources to DCFS to do outreach to these families, correct?
Representative, I'm really there's nothing in the bill that does that.
Okay, so there's nothing in the bill that helps prevent abuse and neglect in either non-public schools or children at home.
I'd like to make a clarification about who investigates truancy and educational neglect. That's not handled by the Department of Children and Family Services. It's handled by the Regional Offices of Education that already have truancy budgets built into, and investigations built into their budgets.
Perfect. They
And
do,
let me
except
just,
that they
and I
will
would
say-
also like to add to that, thank you. In addition to that, I'm really excited to hear that you all are going to be supporting increases to budgets to not just the State Board of Education, but to the Department of Children and Family Services. I'm thrilled to hear that you're going to be supporting that. I think it's also really important that at the request of many individuals, including education, that we have done our best to limit DCFS in the sense of they should not be looking at educational neglect. They're not educators. They're social workers. And so individuals who are actually the ones who should be looking at that, that's what's happening. Let me give you a really great example that was brought to me actually recently, because I'm not sure if you quite understand when the Regional Office of Education actually makes a referral for a truancy from a school, the Regional Office of Education, they send that to the state's attorney's office. The state's attorney's office actually makes that final determination whether or not they're going to file on educational neglect or something else. But recently I learned of a couple of cases in my own area where not only did the state allege educational neglect, they alleged other forms of neglect in that family, which absolutely proved this point, which was that truancy officer that had been working with the family to help them with resourcing them getting to school actually saved a child. They actually did their amazing job to make sure there was something else going on in that home. And now the state's attorney was making the determination on what to do. I was thrilled. I mean, I thanked my Regional Office of Education superintendent for them actually doing their job and saving that child. It was great.
Well, that's interesting because I know various ROEs have reported that when a homeschool family it's determined if there's a complaint that it's a homeschool family, that they don't do anything further. So when you say that their budgets are going to include this, no, it's not, because they don't know the numbers and they could be getting complaints nonstop based on, God knows, any number of things, divorce cases, and people make these complaints on various different things on, you know, a neighbor doesn't like the kid playing in the backyard. I mean, there are any number of reasons why these complaints could be received, but the ROE does not actually have enough resources, and I believe they're asking for more resources to be able to investigate this because there is going to be a financial burden on this system.
Educational resources are generally increasing would be helpful, but that's not the general problem when homeschool is invoked by an individual's family. There is no regulation for the ROEs to be able to do anything about a homeschool family that claims that they're homeschooling. They can't do anything about that. There's nothing in state law about that currently, and this
So
just
why
puts
didn't
that
we just give them the
declaration in.
authority? We could have done that
We did.
without a registration scheme. We could have done that so that it's a complaint and they investigate. What we've done here is cause this huge financial administrative burden on every homeschool family, on every non-public school, to get to a point where all you really need is the ability for the ROEs to investigate. Why didn't we just do that? This bill has grown into something that it didn't need to be.
Actually, ISB was given, was it 12 million, Dana, in 2023 to address truancy issues. So yes, actually ISB is invested, and that money went based to the ROEs based on the grant opportunities. I would take a deeper dive, if I were you, Representative, on exactly what the truancy laws state and what the authority is with the truancy officer. They can already check on something if they do. But typically what happens in a homeschool family, if they say they're homeschooled and things stop. That's it.
That's what I'm saying. So now when we say, oh no, this should be okay to be included in the ROE's current budget, that's not true, because they can now request the educational portfolio. They can request the parent's high school diploma. This is a lie to say that this is not going to cost schools, districts, ROEs, and ISB money. That is absolutely not possible.
Well, it is because we also don't have any data that tells us how many families are actually out there. I'm sorry, Chair, you were going to say something. I apologize.
I need Representative Ellick to bring her questions to a close. We have a list of other people that want to ask questions, and I have a feeling many of their questions may duplicate yours. We could circle back at the end if you feel that there is something of merit that you would like to add,
think I
but
can
we
close.
do need to move on.
Thank you. I think I can close with this. We have had thousands of kids and families over the last year or so visit the Capitol begging and pleading for this General Assembly to keep the Invest in Kids Act in place so that they could put their kids in a different environment than the public schools and have just a little bit of help from the state to do that. You and your colleagues said it is not appropriate. We should not be spending state funds on private schools. That's what we're doing in this bill. If you're uncomfortable with the Invest in Kids Act, you should be really uncomfortable with the burdens that it is placing on every level of the school system. It is absolutely going to be spending money on private school families and homeschool families who are doing the best job that they can and chose a different environment for their kids. So I will leave it at that, Chair, and I know my colleagues have questions. Thank you.
Representative Croak.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, I would just say that I supported the Invest in Kids Act and I support this bill. So I guess that, puts me in good standing with our colleagues. But I do have a quick question. Do homeschool parents pay taxes?
I believe so.
And sometimes they probably qualify for like the child care tax credit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they have to give information on the fact that who they are and their children's information and their social security number too to the government.
Yes.
So the systems that protect ISB's database with all that confidential private information is probably pretty similar to the other databases that our government has to protect that information.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think that the argument that all of a sudden that by having this information, there's going to be a leak or this massive amount of information that goes out into the public is misguided. And would you like to respond to that?
I would agree with you, Representative. We also have individuals who have to register their cars every year with the Secretary of State. So yes, these exist.
I'll just close with, I send my kid to a Catholic school and I've got a 1- and 2-year-old. I plan on doing that. I'm disappointed by the opposition that was presented from the Catholic schools today. Very, very disappointed. I think that it delegitimizes that education and the fact that also as an individual who does want my child to have a religious education, I totally support that. But I also support this bill because in some way we may be protecting even just through a form, a few kids. And there are so many instances in where we give information or we do things as a society in order to protect children or protect people. And this is something that is so bare minimum in order to be able to say that we know a kid exists, where they live, where they're going to school because they're homeschooled. So I just would keep that in mind as we talk about like what someone is having to give up and what we're potentially being able to receive as a society because of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you,
Representative. Representative Crespo, you're next.
Thank you. And first, I have the utmost respect for the sponsor. I consider her one of my favorite people in General Assembly, but I won't be able to support the bill, and I want to state why. Number one, I'm not influenced by my fellow Puerto Rican, Mr. Estrada. It had no impact on me, but I'm mostly influenced by the many families in my district that I know, that I've known for 20, 30 years. And some of these kids are now even parents themselves, and I think they've done a phenomenal job. I'm not minimizing the concern. It is a real concern. But I'll submit to all of you that we have structures in place today for DCFS for public schools. And I've had DCFS come before my audit commission every 2 years, and it seems like they're always having issues in protecting children in the state, and that's even with structures in place. I shared this committee many years ago when we were dealing with the sexual abuse scandal in Chicago with CPS. And we had witnesses and young ladies come like you wouldn't believe. And again, and we have structures in place, and that abuse still takes place today. And it's not only public schools. We have structures in place for private and Catholic schools, and we read in the paper always that we have issues with students not being protected. I'm not sure how a form would address the concern that's brought before us today. And finally, I do believe in parents' rights, and I'm concerned that if we open the doors, it's just a matter of time before we insist that they have certain curriculum or have some unfunded mandates. So again, just for the record, that's the reason why I won't be able to support it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I do want to remind everyone who keeps referencing DCFS, they do not have the legal authority to investigate educational neglect. That's why we need to give more tools to our ROEs who are tasked with being able to investigate educational neglect. Representative Swanson, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is anyone here from the ROE to testify?
Yes, I do believe we have someone available.
Well, if they can maybe work their way up. The question I would have is, do they believe it's not going to cost them anything? So the ones I've talked to have indicated it would cost money for an ROE to be a part of this.
My name is Gary Tipso. I'm the Executive Director representing IARSS, so the regional offices and ISCs. I think just the objective analysis, if you have a current workload today and this increases that workload, the expectation would be there's likely to be additional costs. Those currently are unknown. We just don't know what they would be.
Okay, so to speakers, to our minority spokesperson, there is an additional cost.
I think, again, I think you would anticipate additional cost or moving of resources from one area to another.
And if I just may interject, Representative, I just want to add to that again, ISB gives $12 million annually to address truancy. So the ROEs are getting that money.
Right, but they have the filing requirements and all those requirements too. It's not just a truancy aspect. It's all those other administrative tasks go with it. I'll move on. You know, I sit here and I look at the numbers of opponents. We've now surpassed 47,697 opponents. To me, that's a message. Do you see that as a message to you in this piece of legislation?
Actually, I'm going to tell you who the message is coming from. It's coming from these people who are sitting here behind me.
So
it's coming from, hold on, Representative, if you would let me finish, I give you that same courtesy. This bill is about the thousands of children whose voices are not heard. The thousands of children who don't have those protections, whether you want to believe they come from the Department of Children and Family Services or not. I'm speaking, I am the voice of the voiceless here today, and I will continue to fight for them to have a voice, for them to be protected, and for them to have the right for education. So yes, I care about their voices. That's who I'm here fighting for today.
Well, I guess we're here fighting for the 47,668 that have responded as opponents to this, because those are the voices I hear and the ones I see in my district, the ones I see throughout Illinois, the ones who are here today. I've heard a lot of discussion about compulsory attendance. Does that apply to public schools?
Yes, it does.
So we don't know how, we make a guess that there's truancy in our homeschool students. But yet we have facts and figures that show in 2023, truancy rates in Chicago public schools is 45.9%. We look at 2024 and we see the truancy rate is 48.1. We look at all across the state, it's only 20%. Why are we not focusing our resources and our work towards the truancy in our public schools as opposed to attacking our private schools, our homeschools, saying, your kids aren't doing what they're supposed to do, I know better than you, and I think we should do this?
So again, Representative, there's nothing in the bill that does not make a homeschool student truant. There are opportunities for them to comply with a declaration form, and again, there's a process for that. I would argue that the ROEs, and I'm going to give you a shout out here, Gary, that your regional office of education superintendents are doing their best to address the truancy issue. Again, that is one of the main reasons why ISB increased their funding so that our school district, excuse me, our ROEs, our intermediate service centers, our CPS, that they have the tools that they need. And if there are more tools that they need, then, you know, we'd love to find out what it is that you need.
Azira, would you mind, I believe that ISB would like an opportunity to make a statement on this particular topic.
Hi again. So in our budget book for the Regional Offices of Education, we submit that $12 million is for truancy, but 19 total million dollars are given to the ROEs directly. So $7 million of that would be for administrative expenses. And then we also have our truancy alternative optional education, which are TAOP grants, which is another 11.5 million. So we actually do offer a lot of services and a lot of resources to these ROEs to be able to provide these services. And I believe everyone would love to see an increase to those types of things, but we understand it's a down financial year, but we do offer almost $30 million to them.
And how much of that, how much did you receive last year compared to this year?
11.5 in FY25, 24, 23, and 22 for the TAOP grant, and then $19.4 million since FY23.
So an increase going into 26?
No, those would be flat.
All right, so let's talk, as long as we're all here, let's talk about that education portfolio. Let's go through the process. So if someone shows up at my door and requests to see my education portfolio, is that truant officer?
That's not how this works, sir. Representative, excuse me. That's not how this works. ROEs will not be randomly showing up on your door. It's a process for truancy. And so I can't tell you what each individual ROE is going to do. That's going to be on a case-by-case basis determined by that local regional office of education.
So who can request to see my education portfolio I have on my children?
The truancy officers from a local ROE.
And do they have the legal authority to demand to see that document? Or do they need a search warrant? Or is this going to give them the authority to say, you've got to show proof you're educating your children in these categories or else?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the language specifically, but it would be the same organizations that would be receiving the individual forms. So yeah, it would be the, no, appreciate it. Yeah, Regional Office of Education, ISC, or CPS.
They would be the ones that would knock at my door and demand to see those documents?
No, they would already potentially have those documents.
No.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
So
Am I conflating that?
That's okay. I'll step in there if you mind. So I would direct your attention to failure to submit truancy and educational portfolio, section 25. Again, after notices have been, in the event an individual, again, a truancy investigation has begun, the ROE would check to see if a form is filled out. If it wasn't, there are 3 notices. Again, the goal is encouragement. We want to make sure families have what they need. So truancy officer, in the event a truancy investigation was initiated, would make that request. Again, this is, let's be clear. There's nothing in this bill that makes it random. There's nothing in the bill that makes these investigations random. There's nothing in the bill that makes these investigations random. They are through the authority of a truancy investigation that has started. Let's keep the record clear.
So not random, but who initiates it and why? What would trigger this investigation or trigger this truancy officer to come visit my house?
It would be, go ahead, Representative.
I believe it would be a truancy report. So if the ROE received a report of a truancy accusation, right, either because a child stopped showing up their public school or someone had called DCFS or another organization to report that they suspect truancy, a truancy officer would first check to see that there was a form on file. They would reach out to contact the family. They could make arrangements with the family about an appropriate day and time to come for a visit. They can make arrangements to meet at a public location. It's not a gotcha where they will storm down your door with a warrant. I just do want to make it clear, it is a respectful process.
But who, can my neighbor turn me in for truancy for my children?
They can do that now. That is, there's nothing new in the bill. Your neighbor could do that today already.
For someone in public school?
No, they can do that for any child. Today, the law allows us to, the law allows a truancy officer today to have that authority to check on that, yes.
If I may, this is the crux of the matter, and it's on page 7 and page 8 of the amended version. There are two ways that there can be this investigation. The first one is, as the sponsor said, if the family did not file the information, there's a truancy investigation. But the second way, and this is on paragraph C, page 9 of section 25, and what it says is a regional office of education or intermediate service center or school district, Chicago Public Schools, may request that a homeschool administrator provide an educational portfolio as evidence that the homeschool administrator's homeschool program, blah, 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 and that is at least commensurate with the standards prescribed for public schools. This is a separate way that there could be a review of that educational portfolio. One is for truancy, if you don't file the declaration. One is, and it's not limited to time, place. I mean, this could potentially be if a regional office of education or Chicago Public Schools wanted to come in once a month and see this portfolio.
That is simply not true. That is not in the bill. That is not what the law says. You are wrong.
Where'd you read that from, Will?
This is page 9, paragraph C.
Within the proposed?
Within the amendment.
It states it is part of the truancy investigation. It is not talking about a separate investigation. It is part of a truancy investigation. That's not separate.
It does not prohibit it. And see, there's paragraph B is the truancy investigation. Paragraph C is to see if the education is commensurate with what's in the public school. There are two separate provisions of when the authorities could come in and review the educational portfolio.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Johnson, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair. First off, I want to commend everyone out in the audience and out in the rotunda for your activism. It's inspiring as a longtime organizer. It's just wonderful to see. So thank you. I believe you represent the very best. I'm here in Illinois. I also want to say, Representative Costa-Howard, that you also, I've gotten to know you over the years, and you absolutely represent the very best as well. And I know you've taken a lot of fire here, and I really admire your courage and those that have signed up on this. While those attacks, I don't think have come from people in this room. I think it's pretty sad. So for me, I have the privilege of representing the 72nd District, which is the vast majority of Rock Island County. And I really want to talk about whether or not this bill could have prevented a situation that occurred in my district. I want to talk about Zion Staples. Zion was a 9-year-old who lived in Rock Island with his mother, Sushi Staples. The family, I got to give a little background before I have the question. The family had a long history of abuse and neglect investigations by DCFS, and Staples had lost 2 kids to foster care in Illinois nearly 2 decades before she mistreated them. The children were not returned to her. The most recent investigation was in 2021. The department at that time did not find enough evidence to find mistreatment, and her case was closed. Despite her past involvement with child welfare services, there were currently no Illinois laws that restricted her from homeschooling her children that remained in her care, including Zion and 5 others who were ages 8 to 14. When reporters asked DCFS for the schooling status, the agency's response revealed considerable confusion about where he was being educated. DCFS originally told the news organizations that Zion was enrolled in an online school program, but the company that DCFS said had been providing the schooling told reporters that Zion had never been enrolled. DCFS later clarified that his mother said he was leaving public school in August 2021 to attend an online program, but no one was required to verify this information. On a December morning in 22, Staples told police she returned home from running errands and found Zion dead. A couple of the kids were playing with a gun. A coroner would later find that he had died from an accidental shot fired from a gun that the children found in the house. His mother then hid the body and later confided to her friend, Lauderica Wilson, that she did it because she did not want to risk losing her other children. She told her friend, nobody knows. He's not in school. He's homeschooled. I've got this figured out. Wilson recalled in an interview with a reporter about a conference she had with Staples a few months after the child had died. She still said she had too much to lose. Wilson, who now lives in Florida, said it was one of several calls she had with Staples over the course of months as she tried to figure out what happened and just what to do about it. Police records indicate that in July, in response to a call from Wilson, they visited the home. Staples denied the child even existed. Later, when police executed a search warrant, officers found Zion's body in a metal trash can in the garage. He was still wearing his Spider-Man pajama bottoms. He had now been dead for 7 months. She was charged with concealing the death, failure to report the death of a child, and obstructing justice. So I guess my question to you is there anything in this bill that, if that had been current law, that could have potentially saved little Zion's life?
I sure hope so, Representative. Thank you for sharing his story. Those are the voices that I'm here to talk about today. Sorry that you don't care about those voices, but I know I do, and I know Representative Johnson does too. Yes, I believe that that would happen.
Okay.
I am here to speak for Zion. And I apologize. I'm not suggesting that people in this room don't care about kids, but I'm here to be here. You're right. Representative, I recognize that. But I'm here to speak for Zion today. And yes, I believe in this bill we would have been able to protect him. Yes, I do.
Okay. We're going to keep cool heads. Very quickly. We need to move on with some procedure.
Nope, you go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say quickly that as a survivor of abuse, as a homeschool person, a large reason why there's not more voiced support for legislation that could at least help to get more eyes on situations of abuse. Now, studies exist showing that homeschool regulations don't prevent abuse, but it would be helpful to have an idea, especially as a researcher who works on these issues, of how many kids are out there. A large reason why there's not more support is that it's very, very traumatic for survivors to have to be constantly put down by current homeschool parents. When that article came out about Zion, homeschool moms that are friends of mine, their immediate response was, this makes homeschooling look really bad. It wasn't concern for kids who, like Zion, are not being responsibly raised or are not being responsibly educated. And I personally think, and my research has led me to this conclusion, that the way to prevent abuse in homeschool communities is by taking community-based approaches, and that has to be the responsibility of the parents in the homeschool communities. Currently, this is not something that exists anywhere throughout the US in any of the communities that I have communicated with. For homeschool parents to just immediately go to, this is bad for us, instead of considering the well-being of children that their kids are growing up with, who may be suffering at home, for them to be focused on, this doesn't happen in my family, or this only happens in religious communities, like, is so dismissive, and there's so much abuse that does go ignored. And so what I really hope comes out of this whole conversation, whether the bill is passed or not, is that homeschool parents are able to start to really acknowledge, hey, these are issues that are happening in our communities. We do have a responsibility to do something to make our communities safer places for all of the kids that we are directly responsible for, whether they're our own children or not, and to be working together to come up with their own systems for making sure everyone is safe, and to be building bridges with former homeschoolers who are being really brave, putting ourselves out there, being re-traumatized, to try to communicate with you about what's happened to us and why it's important. Thank you.
The death of Zion Staples was horrific. I take seriously the words of Jesus in the New Testament, that it would have been better for a millstone to have been put around that person's neck than for him to die. But this bill would not have protected Zion Staples. So how do we protect other vulnerable children? It's through DCFS. DCFS dropped the ball on that, and a child died as a result. So how do we provide more support to them, not putting more of a burden on them, as HB 2827 would do with DCFS, but give them more of the resources? They're underfunded. They're overworked. You talk to caseworkers, the burnout, the trauma that they go through. That's what we should be looking at.
Okay. So we need to move some people around. We need to get some representatives into some other committees. So we are going to go ahead and open the roll. At this time, Representative Favor-Diaz moves that 2827 do pass as amended. Clerk, could you please take the roll for Representative Croak?
Musman?
Could you please just call on Croak?
Oh, sorry. What was that again?
Could you please call on Croak to affirm her vote before she leaves?
Yeah, Croak. Okay. Croak?
Yes. Okay, I appreciate the pause. I'm going to suggest that this is getting a little bit emotional, and I'm going to ask everybody to please bring the temperature back down. We do have a couple more people seeking questions, but we are going to have to surrender our room. So we are going to want to keep this a little bit tight. And again, my intention is not to cut off the debate, but we do have logistical issues that we need to meet with. We are going to go ahead and proceed. Representative Niemer, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have a few questions on the education portfolio. Just to elaborate a little bit more on Representative Swanson. A regional office of education or immediate service center or Chicago Public Schools may request that a homeschooler administrator provide an education portfolio as evidence that the homeschool administrator's homeschool program provides a satisfactory course of instruction that is at least commensurate with the standards prescribed for public schools. My first question is, that's on page 9, section 25C. It appears that this is open-ended. What is the intent of this?
I can speak to that. So what is required of public schools and as well as schools that register is they need to attest that they are providing instruction in English language and in the areas of language arts, mathematics, biological and physical science, social science, fine arts, and physical development and health. We do not put any specificity beyond that.
Okay. And as far as section 25C, it looks like this is a standalone, that the ROE may at any time decide they're going to come into folks' home and say, hey, we want to see your education portfolio and to make sure that it is within the standards prescribed for public schools. Is that accurate or not accurate?
That is contained under section 25, this failure to submit for truancy of the education portfolio, so that is part of the truancy clauses of this bill.
For legislative intent, if it's before, a judge down the road, is that the intent? Because it appears here that C would begin another subsection that would constitute this may from the ROEs as for any reason whatsoever.
The legislative intent is that the educational portfolio is for truancy investigation.
Thank you. Thank you. And then secondly, commensurate with standards prescribed for public schools. You had kind of gone over that a little bit. Does that include mandates that come down from the state of Illinois on curriculum mandates, that religious freedom that the folks in this room would want to practice? What does that include?
It would include the things that I listed before and nothing more.
Okay, could you please restate those?
Yeah, of course. It's language arts, mathematics, biological and physical science, social science, fine arts, physical development, and health.
Okay. And is it the ROE that would be making that determination if this education portfolio is satisfactory?
I don't believe the bill says anything about satisfactory.
Okay, well, who then, it says program provides a satisfactory course. It's in the language. Who makes that determination that it provides a satisfactory course?
That would just need to be under those individual titles, and how they meet those would be up to the individual programs that the homeschoolers are providing that information on.
Who makes the decision of whether or not they're complying with the statute?
It would be, I believe it would be the ROEs, but I would leave that up to the legislator to explain.
It is up to the individual ROEs and how they assess that information. It would be a case-by-case basis, but then that is what the flexibility is intended to do, is so that just those freedoms that you were describing, as long as they fall within the current statute of the subjects, that's the intent.
So does ISB have any rulemaking ability, have any, because it says in here also that ISB provides the student records or information may be released, transferred, disclosed, or otherwise disseminated to the State Board of Education. So does the State Board of Education have any rulemaking ability to supersede the ROE's decision?
We have broad rulemaking authority for the entirety of the school code, but no, we would not do that.
Okay, so you would not be involved in rulemaking ability on the ROE's decision if this education portfolio meets its satisfactory requirements?
That would be up to the ROEs to make that determination.
And what would so we're kind of leaving a lot of authority with individual ROEs. Is there any concern about maybe a particular ROE that sees things differently or doesn't agree with the religious freedoms of the individuals in this room?
No, that is, the intent is so that it is up to each regional office of education and how they want to do that.
I believe that if the ROE wanted to escalate an investigation of authentic truancy, they would have to take it in front of the state's attorney and it would go in front of a court system. The ROE would not have unilateral authority to determine that your portfolio was inadequate and in any way mandate that you return your child to public education, just to make that clear.
Correct, and that is why there are additional layers of review of how somebody a truancy investigation actually occurs and what occurs. In speaking to various state's attorneys in preparing for this bill, I wanted to know how many cases that were actually filed versus referred, and it's not as many as anybody expects. So again, your local state's attorney would be reviewing any truancy any truancy cases that would be civilly in court. That's on the state's attorney to make that determination.
Okay, thank you. And ISB, you had said that the reason for the form and what we're doing here today is that you want to know where our students are. Is that correct?
We will know based off those forms and their declaration or registration, yes.
Okay, so you want to know where our students are, is what you stated previously.
Yeah, all students in the state of Illinois deserve an education.
Okay, well, just make something very clear. They're not ISB's kids. They're not the government's kids. There are these parents in this room that are standing up for their, religious freedoms, parental rights. They're their kids and they're their students. And to insinuate, that we don't care about a child that was victim of a horrible crime is an insult to the 47,000 witness slips, an insult to the moms that are looking at me right now in this room, and to everybody in the state of Illinois that has opposed this bill. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Willauer, you are next.
Thank you. Representative, I just want to be really, really clear on this. Are you saying that this bill prohibits random checks by the ROI or the Chicago Public Schools?
Correct. It is under, the statute is under truancy investigations.
Okay. Well, I think that a lot of the people that have looked at this would disagree with that, but I'm glad that you had stated that. I just want to be clear on this declaration form. This isn't a form that you can produce today.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that many ROEs, and this one's from King County, and I'm sure you did your homework, Representative, these forms already exist in many places.
But they
because
don't
they're-
exist in the manner that they're going to be utilized as a result of this legislation.
I can't tell you what every form looks like, but ISB is
Well, they
going to.
don't. My understanding is the ISB.
Representative, do you want me to let me finish answering my question? Just let me finish answering.
Sure.
ISB is going to complete the creation of the form and verify that information.
Okay, well, you lay out certain parameters that they have to cover. Is it limited to those parameters?
The intention of the language is in the event that any federal or state, federal law or state law gives the flexibility so that we don't have to create new legislation, which I know you would be thrilled to hear, not new legislation, and so that individuals, that the department can be nimble in what they need to do.
Okay, so instead of creating a form with the legislation, we're giving that power to bureaucrats to put whatever they want on that form without legislation, just to be clear.
I don't read it that way, but go ahead. Is there a
You don't
question?
read it, you don't read it, the State Board of Education can expand what they require on that form without specific legislation?
I believe that it provides ISB the need that they have to include required information that has been legislated either federally or statewide.
Okay, but it's very clear that it's open-ended, that it's subject to rulemaking, and it can be specifically expanded without legislation. Go ahead.
Yeah, we would not go above and beyond what's enumerated in there.
Oh, thank you. That's very heartening from ISB. You've got an excellent track record of having the kids' best interests in mind. Thank you for saying that. Does this change? Does this under current law and judicial precedents? Homeschoolers are currently classified as private, basically as private schools. Now that we're doing this homeschool declaration form, which is different from private schools declaration, are we creating a new classification for homeschoolers as just homeschoolers?
Yes, currently they fall outside of that because we don't have any registration for them whatsoever in any manner. And so this would create that declaration, which would be different than the private non-public registration process.
Well, there's a lot of state and federal programs that are designed specifically for people who are enrolled in public schools or private schools. There's a serious concern, especially with disabilities and IEPs and things of that nature, that creating this new classification would prohibit homeschoolers. A lot of folks choose homeschooling because private schools and public schools are not able to specifically address really specific special needs. And creating this new classification, there's a legitimate fear that you are going to be prohibited from receiving funding based on that.
Our interpretation is this would not change any of those current processes that already exist for homeschool students and their families.
How would you interpret that if you're creating a whole new class that's not backed by federal policy when they're disseminating these funds?
It's not our interpretation that this would change any of the current processes that already exist that are handled at the local level.
Does anybody have a different interpretation? Mr. Estrada?
Thank you, Aziza. So you've got Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. These are the federal programs. They provide funding, of course, to our public schools for children with special needs, and under equitable services, the children in private schools who get some funds as well. People versus Levison established, of course, that you had to homeschool, you had to teach the required subjects, and it also established that homeschooling was legal as a form of private education. When I look at HB 2827, I think what's going to happen is the courts and the school districts will say, notwithstanding any guidance that ISB might put out, well, you're no longer a private school, you're now a homeschool. Sorry, we don't have to provide even equitable services to you anymore.
Mr. Levison, do you mind if I ask, in the 39 other states that have some form of registration, 25 of them annual, just like we're requesting, are those children barred from accessing federal services?
So there are 14 states, Illinois is one of the 14 states where homeschooling is actually legal as a type of private school. Texas is one, California, New Jersey, Illinois, those are some of the others. In those 14 states, homeschoolers can get certain services for children with special needs as equitable services. So it doesn't relate to whether you file or whether you don't. It relates to whether legally you are classified as a homeschool, which is outside of the federal IDEA, ADA, Section 504, or whether you are legally under state law classified as a private school.
So under Levison, individuals under IDEA does not address services for students with disabilities who voluntarily homeschool, but states may determine whether these students should be considered the same for parentally placed non-public schools. ISB has historically treated homeschool students the same as non-public school students, and we do not expect to change that.
Which is good, though, because of People versus Levison. This HB 2827 changes it, so I think it's going to, I hope it doesn't, but I think it would change ISB's guidance.
It's not our interpretation that this would change anything that is currently in practice.
Thank you. Well, it's something that's certainly concerning, and certainly hope that would be specifically addressed in any upcoming amendments on this. The curriculum that is mandated, or the broad parameters that are mandated by the state of Illinois to ensure that your education is up to snuff, all of that is run through the school code, correct?
All of that currently exists, yes.
Yeah. One of the big concerns is just a couple years ago, we were trying to amend the school code to include SB 818, which is the very explicit sexual education mandates. One of the real fears of requiring homeschoolers and private schools that choose not to be recognized is once you get into that system and once you have to be recognized, you're tied to the school code, which can very easily include things like this. Is that valid, or is that a concern here?
Health class and sexual education are two different things.
Right, but we were literally trying to, okay, so the school code is completely subject to the will and the whim of the legislature. It can be changed overnight. We've seen it try to happen. It can just be changed with a majority vote in the legislature and a signature by the governor, correct?
As is all statute, yes.
Right. So what we're having here is people are escaping these government schools because they're trying to get away from this kind of stuff. They don't want to be tied to that. This is going to require them to be tied to that. And if it's not requiring it today, Representative, it's just one small vote away from doing it. So I don't think that I would just shake my head like this is something that we shouldn't be concerned about. That 44,000 people out here shouldn't be concerned about.
Representative, as ISB has stated, as current law, there are specific subjects that are required to be taught. We don't dictate the curriculum. The freedom and flexibility and creativity, shall we say, is there for homeschoolers as long as they're teaching the subjects. The goal is to make sure that we have kids who are getting an education in those subjects.
I just want to say that I think that the open-ended language and nature of the bill is what is particularly alarming, especially in the Black community, because in the Black community, it takes so much courage and bravery to even step up to homeschool and to know that it could, they could be the brunt of even more targets and attacks or any kind of, just that more things could come as a result of their homeschooling would be a very intimidating experience for the Black community. And even though the legislation doesn't detail that, it's definitely an inevitable consequence that would come in the community that I live, for sure.
Thank you.
And I would add to that, I respect the position that you're coming from. If there is draft language that you would like us to review, Representative, regarding that, please feel free.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We'll certainly do that. Just to get a little bit of insight into your motives and you know where you're going with this and your outlook. I mean, you've been quoted in the media saying the outrage over this bill is outrageous. Do you think that all the good folks here that are absolutely appalled by this legislation are outrageous?
I think people who threaten my family, I believe that is outrageous. Yes, I'm not suggesting, I don't know if there's anyone in this room who in particular, but I do have the names of the individuals who have threatened my family and my home. So yes, I do believe that behavior, to threaten my family and my home, to threaten my colleagues, anyone, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, when you threaten people's family and their homes, that is unacceptable. And I would defend all of you as well if I found out that somebody was making that threat. You and I have had this discussion on other issues, Representative, as you can recall from our freshman year, when you sent people to threaten my family and my home on a gun bill.
Okay.
So I would say, when you told them to, I'm sorry, well, you told them to reach out to me, and with that came threats.
Reaching out is threatening. Disagreeing. I do acknowledge that disagreeing with a lot of liberal ideology is seen as threatening. So you've also said, I want to know that kids are okay and that they're getting what they need and that they can enter society prepared and that they are not functionally illiterate. Are you implying the people that we're subjecting to this bill are academically inferior to the folks in the government schools?
No.
What's the, I mean.
Sir, respectfully, Tanner Levitt, if I may. Definitely not academically inferior. I scored very well on the standardized test that I took, but there are those who don't. My wife is a substitute teacher in our local school district, and she told a story just a couple months ago of a kid who was homeschooled. I believe she was supposed to be whatever grade level it was. I'm going to keep it as anonymous as possible for the students' basic, but bottom line, she was 2 or 3 grades below what the grade that she came in at. So while I would say, again, speaking from experience, the vast majority of homeschool families this does not apply to. It does apply to some. And as the sponsor has mentioned several times, a big part of the problem is we don't know. And so that's what this bill is starting to try to answer. And again, having worked for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association as a lifetime advocate of homeschooling, I strongly believe in the concept, and I want that. What the frustration is that I feel like we just keep, hey, come back with the right answer and we'll support it. But every time we come up, nope, that's the wrong one. It's going to cause more funding. It's going to require more oversight or whatever it is. Children are dying. We've learned about a message there. Like, we have a responsibility as a society to protect those kids. So there is a balance to strike here. I feel very strongly that this bill strikes that balance, but if not, I would encourage those opponents, the 45,000 people who oppose it, what is the answer? Propose your own bill. I've worked for Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and I've never seen them propose a bill to help this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the answer is to leave them alone. The system has worked for decades and generations, and pretty much all the studies say, and by our own metrics from the State Board of Education, our government schools are failing. You know, 7 out of 10 kids are not reading or doing math at grade level. It's even worse in the Chicago public schools. Whereas, you know, most of the studies are saying that homeschool folks score better on all of these.
Representative, if I could remind you that if a homeschooler is taking any sort of state assessment, it is because they self-selected to do that.
Well, they take
Whereas
the SAT
everyone
and the
in a public
ACT.
school is required to take that test, no matter what their qualifications are, no matter whether or not they speak English. It is everybody in the pool. You are not comparing apples to apples when you use that reference. Thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, but, you know, places like the state of Florida that have much more diverse population than us score better on those tests than what we do. So point of clarification there. So, you know, Representative, you gave a really impassioned, you know, defense of the folks that testified, and I appreciate that. I think they do come from a good place. I've got, in light of that, I've got a question for the Coalition for Responsible Homeschooling. Are they still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. So if I'm a homeschooler or I'm a private school that's not seeking recognition, and I'm demanding parental consent for my minor child to access gender-affirming care information, abortion, sexual ed content, LGBTQ issues. If I believe that confused boys shouldn't compete in the girls' sports or have access to locker rooms, am I a parental rights extremist?
I wasn't aware that we were engaging in the trans sports debate. I'd be more than happy
it's on your website.
But that isn't relevant to this bill.
Sir, that is not germane to this bill. I agree.
And the subject requirements
where the advocates are coming from on this stuff. I think it's important.
Again, our bill is independent of the advocates. I'd like you to speak to the bill that is in front of you, and nothing in this bill reference those points that you just bring up. So again, we need to stay on topic.
Yeah.
We still have at least one other person to ask questions.
Well, I appreciate that, but their website does state that, and she thought it was proper to have them come in here. I just want to tell the folks that came out here today and that have filed all the witness slips and made your voices heard, it matters. Don't be discouraged by, you know, anything that happens here. In spite of what happens here today, we're a long ways away from this being over. You're right on principle. You guys, we up here, at least on the front row, we know that you know what's best for your kids. You know, and you know, regardless of what the government or this committee does, the public education system that you've escaped has been a failure, and we know that you're going to do the right thing for your kids in the long run. And we thank you. We thank you so much for making your voice heard here.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to remind everybody that we are well over our appointed time, and we will need to be moving to the floor soon. So we are going to be wrapping up the proceedings. Favor Diaz, I believe you have the last questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So first, I also want to echo my fellow colleagues' gratitude to all the people who showed up today. As a former history teacher, there is no better civics lesson than what the practice that you all have just engaged in, and you are doing a phenomenal job of educating your children on how to engage in the civics process. I also want to thank you, Representative Acosta Howard. We've had multiple conversations about this bill. You have been available again and again and again, and we have gone in depth, and I'm not going to belabor. We have talked about the declaration form, we've talked about the portfolio, we've talked about the truancy investigations. I think I just have two questions to wrap up. One, I'm a former public school teacher. I know firsthand the challenges and issues that students face in our public schools. I'm also a former homeschool parent. I homeschooled my children for a year. I believe in parents' rights to homeschool their children if the public school is not the best fit. Do you, Representative?
Yes, I do.
And does this bill negate parents' rights to homeschool their children?
Not in any way.
Thank you.
I believe, Representative, do you want to close?
I do.
I just want to say that I think to the extent that I know you said it doesn't negate parents' rights, but it does indirectly just kind of like discourage their right that they do have in certain communities, the way that the bill is presented and written, and the way that it even exists, honestly, because there's so many different open-ended natures of it as far as the portfolios and what has to be in the portfolio, and how, you know, if it's not here at this time, then it has to be, you know, you can be considered truant and some kind of a criminal. So there are lots of different things that will discourage a parent's right to be able to homeschool their children just because it exists. So even if it doesn't say we're taking it right away, the fact that it's there can discourage their courage from being able to choose this, if that makes sense.
Again, to answer your direct question to me, there's nothing in the bill that does that, and I do support the option for parents to homeschool if they so choose. Chair, before I just wrap up, I know ISB had a response to a question they didn't get a chance to answer.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of comments about the education in our public schools, and I just want to talk about some of the things that we do really well in the state of Illinois. From the Spring 24 assessment, we have our highest ever proficiency rate in the English language. In class of 2024, we have seen the highest graduation rate in the state of Illinois. On the nation's report card, our Illinois 8th graders are outperforming the national average across all metrics, reading and math. And then Illinois student performance has held steady across subjects and grades from 22 and 24 post-COVID, despite the nation showing reading loss and reading proficiency going down. We in the state of Illinois have done incredible things and are leading the nation to ensure our public schools are adequate and ensuring that we give them the best platform we can.
May I close? Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion today, and I appreciate my colleagues acknowledging the work that we've done, including speaking with Representative Ellick. I know everybody in this room, and I know my colleagues on both sides of the aisle care about kids. How we get to that place sometimes looks a little different, and I do have a great deal of respect for Representative Ellick and I. We've had debates about lots of topics, but I know we always come back to the place, but we're all coming from the same place. I want to make sure that we understand a couple things. A lot of this bill is about building parity. This bill is about making sure that kids are safe. There's nothing in this bill, despite what you keep hearing, there's nothing in this bill that restricts homeschool parents to do what they do. There's nothing in this bill that people have a First Amendment right to their religion and to teach as such. There's nothing in the bill that does that. I want to point out, it was actually kind of a nice statement that was made by Aziz about education can't work without parents. But we have parents who are out there, as we've talked about and we've heard from our homeschool alumni, who don't do it the right way, who don't have the ability to do it the right way. So we want to make sure that those kids are okay. We want to applaud the people who are doing it well. We do. We want to make them the example to help. But while we still have kids out here who are telling us that they did not get that education, it's important for us to do that. A comment that was made earlier about educator misconduct in our schools, I found kind of interesting because those rules that we have in our schools for somebody who's been convicted of a prohibitive offense, like a sex offense, those don't apply to homeschool families. So you guys are all okay that anybody who has that conviction, that's okay for them to be homeschool parents. Talk about a level of protection that is missing on children. Again, that is a huge level of protection that is not on a child. None of those things that would prohibit an individual from being even in our school around kids, that doesn't apply to homeschool families and homeschoolers because there are zero protections here in the state of Illinois. So let me review one more time. Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, Wisconsin. They have declaration forms. We are the outliers. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative. Our roll call is already open. Clerk, could you please continue taking our roll?
Musman?
Yes.
Favor Dias?
Yes.
Ellick?
No.
Blair Sherlock?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Mason?
Yes.
Niemer?
No.
Swanson?
No.
Willauer?
No.
Yenroer.
Yes.
Crespo.
Present.
Okay, 7. Am I missing one? Who is it? Costa Howard? Yep. Costa Howard?
Yes.
All right, 8 in favor.
There being 8 votes in favor, 4 voting opposed, and 1 voting present, House Bill 2827 is declared passed as amended and will be favorably reported to the House floor.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the robust debate today. There being no further business, the House Education Policy Committee will recess to the call of the chair.